When I was a child, my family and I moved into my grandmother's old house, a massive, antiquated structure that had seen better days. The moment I stepped inside, I was struck by the grandeur of the place. The high ceilings and intricate woodwork were a reminder of its age, but it was the winding circular staircase that really captured my attention. It connected the two floors in a way that made the house feel both mysterious and inviting. Each step seemed to creak with stories of the past, echoing through the hallways, as if the house itself was alive. Living in the house were my mother, my two sisters, my Uncle John, his son, and of course, my grandmother. My older sister often struggled with her mental health, which added a layer of complexity to our already bustling home. Despite the challenges, we were a close-knit family, sharing laughter and stories over dinner. The kitchen was always warm and filled with the smell of my grandmother's cooking, creating a comforting atmosphere that made me feel safe. There was a sense of belonging, a feeling that we were all part of something greater, nestled within the walls of that old house. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect home. The living room was spacious, filled with cozy furniture and family photos that lined the walls. I felt enveloped by a sense of security, surrounded by my loved ones in a place where I could be myself. Yet, as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were whispers in the night and odd creaks that made me wonder if the house held secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. But for now, I allowed myself to revel in the warmth of my family and the charm of our new home. At night, when the house was quiet and everyone had gone to bed, I would often hear something strange. It started off subtly, soft creaks on the old wooden staircase, almost like the house settling. But soon, it became clear that these weren't just random noises. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed up the circular staircase, climbing closer to our bedrooms. I lay in bed, listening, the sound sending chills down my spine. My curiosity would always get the better of me, though, and I'd find myself sneaking out of bed to investigate. I would tiptoe down the hallway, my heart racing in my chest, only to find the corridor empty every single time. The steps had stopped the moment I reached the top of the stairs, as if whoever, or whatever, had been there knew I was coming. I would stare down the dark, winding staircase, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the shadows below. But there was never anyone there, just the eerie silence of the house, as if it was mocking me for looking. Each time, I convinced myself it was just the creaky old stairs playing tricks on my imagination. The next morning, I mentioned the footsteps to my mother, expecting her to brush it off. But to my surprise, she looked at me with concern. "I've heard them too," she admitted quietly, glancing nervously toward the stairs. Her words sent a cold wave of unease through me. It wasn't just my imagination after all. We both had heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps climbing those stairs at night. But if it wasn't one of us, who was it? Despite the growing sense of unease, neither of us felt threatened. It was unsettling, yes, but the steps never seemed aggressive, just there, like a presence we couldn't explain. My mother and I would try to laugh it off, making light of the strange noises, but deep down, I could tell we were both starting to feel the weight of the mystery that lingered in the air. The house had secrets, and it was only a matter of time before we uncovered them. One night, we all gathered in the living room after dinner, the soft glow of the TV flickering in the background as we casually chatted. My mom and I had been hearing the strange footsteps for a while now, but we hadn't mentioned it to the rest of the family. That night, though, the conversation naturally turned to the odd things that had been happening in the house. My sisters, my uncle, even my grandmother. Everyone had experienced something peculiar. Dishes would shatter for no reason, cups would tip over without anyone touching them, and sometimes, objects would move slightly out of place, like someone had been there but wasn't seen. It was my mother who first brought up her childhood memories of this very house. She leaned forward, her voice lowering as she recalled how my grandmother used to get furious when glasses or plates would randomly fall and break. "We'd always get the blame," she said, half smiling. "But I swear, we were nowhere near the kitchen when it happened." My grandmother, sitting in her chair, nodded in agreement, her expression serious. "Things have always been strange here," she said, her voice thick with the weight of years of frustration. I never did figure out why. Listening to their stories, my mind began to race. Could there be more to these occurrences than just coincidence? I had always been skeptical of the supernatural, dismissing ghost stories as nothing more than tales to scare kids. But the more I thought about it, the footsteps, the broken dishes, the uneasy feeling that settled over the house at night, the more I wondered if there was something lurking here that we couldn't see. Still, none of us wanted to say it out loud. We weren't ready to jump to conclusions, to admit that there might be something unexplainable, something wrong with the house. We laughed it off as best we could, but the tension in the room was palpable. Deep down, I think we all felt it, that creeping suspicion that whatever was happening wasn't just in our heads. Something or someone was sharing this space with us, and we had no idea who or what it was. One night, we were all in the living room watching a comedy movie, trying to relax. Laughter filled the room, but underneath it, I felt an unease I couldn't shake. It was almost midnight when I heard them again. Those familiar footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the house. They started at the base of the stairs and grew louder as they ascended, each creak of the wood sending chills up my spine. I glanced around, trying to gauge if anyone else had noticed, and saw the same anxious looks on their faces. We had all heard it. Then, just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, something even stranger happened. A faint melody began to play from upstairs. It was soft at first, but unmistakable. A radio, but not just any radio. It was the old one that had sat untouched in my grandmother's room for years. It hadn't worked for as long as I could remember, and yet, there it was, crackling to life in the dead of night. The music it played was distorted, almost otherworldly, as if it was coming from somewhere far away. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. None of us had touched that radio. My hands were shaking as I turned to my mom, but before I could say anything, my sister, who had been quietly sitting next to me the entire time, spoke up. "Grandpa just turned on the radio," she said calmly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My blood ran cold. Grandpa had died years ago. I stared at her, unsure whether to believe her or write it off as her imagination, but the conviction in her voice terrified me. Everyone in the room fell silent. No one wanted to admit it, but we all knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. The footsteps, the music, and my sister's eerie statement had pulled us into a nightmare we couldn't explain. The house wasn't just haunted by memories. Something else was here with us, something that belonged to the past but refused to leave. After that night, nothing felt the same. The house, which had once seemed so warm and safe, now carried an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every time I passed by the stairs or entered my grandmother's room, I felt it, the presence of something unseen. The thought that it might be Grandpa should have brought comfort, but it didn't. Instead, it filled me with a strange mix of fear and sorrow. If it truly was him, why now? Why like this? I spent hours replaying the events in my mind, wondering if he was trying to communicate with us, or if something else had taken his place. The footsteps, the radio, none of it felt like a message of peace. It felt darker. My sister's words echoed in my head, her calm statement about Grandpa as if she had seen him, as if his presence was still here with us. But deep down, I wasn't sure it was really him. The coldness, the fear that gripped my heart, it felt like something was wrong. The rest of the family couldn't ignore it anymore either. My mom stopped brushing off the strange occurrences as coincidences, and even my uncle, who had always been skeptical, grew quiet every time the footsteps started again. We all knew, without saying it out loud, that we were living with something we couldn't explain. We didn't talk about it during the day, but the silence at night spoke volumes. The house was haunted by memories, by our past, and maybe by something darker than we were willing to admit. It became clear we had to make a decision. Pretending nothing was wrong wasn't going to keep us safe anymore. The fear was too real, too close. But as we began to consider leaving the house, none of us could shake the dread of what might follow us, or worse, what might happen if we stayed. We had crossed a line into something unknown, and there was no going back. The uncertainty of what was to come loomed over us, as terrifying as the footsteps that still echoed through the house each night. When I was young, I took great pride in being part of the altar boy group at our church. I loved the feeling of being involved in something so sacred, and as the years passed, I worked my way up to become a ceremonial assistant, helping the priest with even more important duties. It felt like a big honor at the time, something I took very seriously. One day, the priest called me aside and handed me a new tunic. With it came a special responsibility. During Mass, I was to watch for anyone who received the host but didn't consume it. Some people, the priest explained, might try to take the host home, perhaps to give it to a sick relative. In those cases, the priest wanted to offer a blessing or even deliver the host personally. It sounded simple enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than he was saying. I accepted the task, though I couldn't fully grasp the weight of what it meant. At that age, I didn't realize how much responsibility I was actually being given. What could go wrong during such a sacred ritual? But soon enough, I would learn that there was a darkness lurking even within the walls of the church. It was during one of the evening masses when I first noticed him. A man, dressed in a worn-out jacket, stood in the communion line like everyone else, but there was something off about the way he moved. When he received the host, instead of consuming it, I saw him quickly slip it into his pocket. My heart raced. This was exactly what the priest had warned me about. I tried to remain calm, but the sight of it sent a chill through me. I knew what I had to do. I discreetly approached the welcoming team, just as I had been instructed, and told them about the man. They nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation, and positioned themselves near the exit, ready to confront him as he left the church. I stayed back, watching from a distance, unsure of what was about to unfold. As the man made his way to the doors, the tension in the air thickened. The welcoming team closed in on him, gently but firmly guiding him toward the priest. My stomach churned with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Something about this didn't feel right. There was an unsettling darkness around that man, and I could sense it creeping closer with every step he took. As the man stood in front of the priest, the air seemed to grow colder around us. The priest, calm but firm, asked him why he hadn't consumed the host. His voice was steady, but I could sense the underlying tension. The man shrugged, avoiding the question with a vague smile, saying something about not needing it just yet. It was unsettling. He was too calm, too dismissive, for something as sacred as the Eucharist. The priest, not backing down, pressed further. He asked if the man needed the host for someone sick, or if he wanted a blessing for a loved one. The priest's tone was compassionate, but I could see the concern growing in his eyes. That's when the man's demeanor shifted. His smile twisted into something darker, and he leaned in slightly, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he spoke. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that, Father," he said, a disturbing grin spreading across his face. "I'm just saving it for something special, a little ceremony of my own." His eyes gleamed with malice as he added, "Let's just say it's not quite the kind of ritual you'd approve of." A shiver ran down my spine. There was something deeply wrong with this man, and the way he spoke those words left a heavy sense of dread hanging in the air. As we watched the man leave, my heart raced with a mix of fear and confusion. I turned to the priest, searching for answers. "What was that all about, Father? What did he mean by a ceremony?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I could still feel the weight of the man's disturbing words lingering in the air like a dark cloud. The priest's face grew somber, and he placed a hand on my shoulder. "There are people," he began quietly, "who seek to profane the sacred. They take what is holy, like the host, and use it in rituals meant to mock and desecrate the very faith we hold dear." His words sent a chill down my spine. I had always thought of the church as a place of safety and purity, but this was something I had never imagined. A deep sense of dread settled over me. The idea that someone could take something so sacred and twist it into something evil was terrifying. "This isn't the first time it's happened," the priest continued. "Evil finds its way into every corner, even here." His words left me feeling vulnerable, as though the walls of the church were no longer enough to protect us from the darkness lurking just outside. In the days that followed, I started noticing more people behaving strangely during Mass. A woman would slip the host into her pocket. A man would leave it untouched in his hand as he walked away. Each time, I would report it, and each time, the same dread filled the air. It was as if something dark had been unleashed that day, and now it was spreading like a shadow across the congregation. The presence of evil felt more real than ever. I could sense it creeping into every corner of the church, contaminating what was once sacred. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and every time I looked toward the altar, a deep unease gnawed at me. It was as if the church itself had become a battleground, with forces I couldn't understand at play beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the image of the man's sinister smile as he left the church that day. His mocking grin haunted me, a reminder that evil could slip into even the holiest of places. I began to dread every Mass, afraid of what I might see next, afraid that the darkness would eventually consume us all.